Hey there, students. Thank you for rolling with the punches, for changes in schedule. I apologize that we weren't able to meet, but yeah, yesterday there were a couple things that came up that just really couldn't be avoided. Nothing too crazy, but yeah, it definitely created a disruption, particularly in my schedule. But the purpose of this lecture is just to kind of walk you through what I would have talked about in class, specifically the first assignment, the first major project that we're going to work on, and I just want to kind of give you a rundown of what to expect. Before we do that, I do want to redirect you to this front page here. I've added a launch page to our class slides. So whenever you open up the class lecture slides from the Canvas homepage, this will be the first thing you see. You'll notice that there's weeks, all the weeks of the semester. And the first two are underlined, meaning that they're hyperlinks. I can't click on them right now because in the Canva studio or editing studio, it's not a live link, but when you open the slides, you'll be able to click on each link and it will bring you to that particular week that we're in. Also on every other page, there's this home icon that you'll notice, and the home icon um, will bring you back to the launch page if ever like you click on the wrong thing. So yeah, that's kind of for your benefit. But let's get into specifically what we're sort of what we would have been looking at this week. And so first and foremost, I do want to talk about the reading a little bit. Hopefully you all read it, the piece about medical jargon in the medical field and sort of the way that language is used within particular niche communities, and then also the communities of practice piece that talks about what exactly is a community of practice. Obviously, we're not in class, so we would have done this through like discussion-based groups, specifically through your pod groups, but I do want you to think about a couple of things specifically regarding these pieces. One is, what kind of community of practice are you a part of? And if you can, really differentiate a community and a community of practice. A community can be really built about with anything or with any group of people where it's just people who are coming together and meeting regularly and sort of bonding through shared proximity or through shared experiences. So your reading talked about how like a neighborhood could be a community, or oftentimes your church is a community, right? What differentiates a community of practice is that this is a group of people who are sharpening specific skills and ultimately have a specific goal. Now, you can argue that the Biola community is a community of practice where we're all sort of collectively moving towards building knowledge and gaining wisdom, and you can be very specific about it. But um, there's also sort of a, I guess, like a broadness to that can make Biola more of just like a community where we're all kind of in the same space and like, yes, kind of moving towards graduation together. But a really specific community of practice would be like your majors, your cohorts within your majors, your classes. Classrooms are often a community of practice. Our classroom is a community of practice where the goal of the class is to sharpen writing skills, and therefore all of our activities together are meant to ultimately accomplish that goal. So there's a little bit more specificity to that, and the reading talks about, what is a community of practice and what differentiates that from other communities. So it's important for you to think through that, especially for this first assignment, because ultimately the a community of practice has values. Any community has values, but specifically a community of practice has values because there's something that motivates whatever that skill is or whatever the practice is. And that's really what you're going to have to do in this first assignment. The second thing I want you to think about is the way that language and rhetoric really as a whole is used to create meaning within sort of these disciplinary communities of practice. That language is one of the ways that you create the culture of a particular dynamic or a particular community, and recognizing that and understanding that can also help you identify what are the values of that community. Um, Recognizing how language is used and what is important, and sort of slang terms and colloquial language use, like that really can pinpoint what is important, or what are some of the things that are necessary for the community to thrive. And so I want you to think about those things. You'll see in the next reading, the one that's due tonight for you, um, what happens when language and rhetoric and communication breaks down, and when there is a sort of a conflict of value and a conflict of perspective, how that can create tension, and ultimately disrupt uh, that community of practice. So I want you to think about those things, more specifically, because that's really where um, that's really what will help you address this first project. Okay, so let's get into the first project now that we've kind of talked about it. So your first project is called um, Exploring Genres and Disciplinary Values. It's a very long title, and I've just kind of shortened it at the top here, Project 1, Genre and Values Paper. You'll notice that the title of this page is a hyperlink. You can click on it and it will bring you to a breakdown of the entire assignment. But ultimately, this project um, is a piece of reflective rhetorical analysis, where you will really pull back sort of the curtain on your major, or look under the hood. That's what the description says, right? What goes on under the hood of the communication used in your major discipline. Specifically, what we'll be looking at are the choices, the rhetorical choices people make in your field to effectively communicate with a particular audience, or with different audiences for different purposes. And so the goal of this paper is for you to identify a value of your discipline, and ultimately argue for how that value is embedded or encoded within those examples of rhetoric that you'll be analyzing. So you need to choose 3 artifacts. You were told to bring one to class, and so that might be one that you use. It is not necessary for it to be one that you use. After, if you've like analyzed it, you decide like, hey, I actually want to do something else, you can do that, but you have to have 3 for this paper. And the only sort of stipulation is that it communicates, meaning that it is from one person, one expert within your field, to another, to an audience of some kind, whether that's another expert in the field, or if it's to students who are planning to be in that field, or if it's to a general audience, like whatever that is, but there is a sort of communication that is happening, right? And so once you've decided on 3, then you will locate and describe how these artifacts express or encode a key disciplinary value of your major, meaning that how does that value show up in the writing, not necessarily explicitly, but how is the structuring of that writing exemplifying whatever the value is. And so there's 2 approaches to this. You can either find 3 rhetorical artifacts that represent your major, meaning things that are pretty typical to your field. So if you're in like business, that might be like a pitch deck and I don't know, a LinkedIn page, or and like an article, right? An academic article. Or if you're in psychology, maybe that's yeah, that's like a textbook, or maybe a syllabus from a psych class, and an email from a colleague to a colleague, right? If in CMA, maybe that is a visual poster for a movie, to a what are those things called? A shot list, to maybe a budget for a film, right? Anything that really communicates. So you can find 3 artifacts, and then analyze those 3 and try to identify a key value that is represented in all 3 of those things, and then explain where you see that showing up in the rhetoric. Or you can go the other way and start with a value, um, And if you start with a value, then you would just find three sources that you think that value is easily represented in. So you can kind of go in either direction. It just depends on your personal process. But yeah, that's kind of the main goal. So again, we're not looking for artifacts that are explicitly talking about rhetoric or like communication within your field. They could, but you want to be really careful not to summarize the artifact and ultimately write a book report on it. Instead, I want you to analyze those artifacts, and your thesis or your major claim should be that this value is represented through these artifacts by blah, 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 whatever that is, right? And so a couple of things to keep in mind. Regardless of which approach you do, the value or values, let's say you find two values that are really interconnected to one another, the value must be represented in all three artifacts. Don't try to find three different values and like argue that for each individual paper. No, it has to be one value or like, or at least like a connection of values that are represented in all three. And part of the reason why I highly suggest you stick to one is because this is a shorter paper than most. You want to be really judicial about your choices. But yeah, you want to pick a value that is represented in all three artifacts. Make sure you define whatever that value is, because again, like we talked about last week, clarity within one discipline could be really differently defined by another discipline, and those different definitions encompass different things, right? So clarity in English will be really different than clarity in sociology or clarity in nursing, right? Because maybe clarity in English has more to do with like breadth of research and peer-reviewed sources, whereas something like nursing clarity is all about conciseness and directness um, uh, and necessity or efficiency, right? And so you want to be able to define that value and explain its purpose or its intention in the grand scheme of that community of practice. All artifacts must be from a professional, so it cannot be something that was written by a student or somebody that is not within the field itself. So it has to be a professional expert in your field. So it could be a professor, it could be somebody like a CEO of a company, it could be a doctor, it could be, whatever it is, but it just has to be somebody that is working within your field, right? And you can't use your own work as an artifact because technically you are not fully a professional expert yet because you're still in school, so keep that in mind. But I do encourage you to get creative with the kinds of artifacts you use and to use a variety of them. I usually encourage students with the three, to pick an academic piece, a professional piece, and maybe some kind of wild card, but to not feel constrained to like textual evidence or textual pieces unless that's something that's really indicative of your major, right? So oftentimes I'll have students who will use a syllabus, and then maybe a professional academic article, and then maybe something more visual like a TED Talk or a YouTube video, or um, I don't know, like a visual, an infographic, right? Um, Whatever the case is, though, just remember that genre is going to be a really big part of this project. Genre is going to be something that you really break down, because the genre of a piece or the context in which something is distributed has a lot of sort of aspects to it, right? Of like, it has to meet certain criteria, or it has to be peer reviewed in a particular way or by an array of people, or it has to be peer reviewed at all, right? Like, all of those things are going to be really major influences in how something is crafted and why something is crafted. And that could be a really big indication of what is valued by the discipline. Now, the paper itself is 3 to 4 pages of content, meaning that doesn't include your title page, it doesn't include your works cited page, 3 to 4 pages of content. And with that, even because you're looking at 3 different artifacts, this means that you have to be really judicial about what you talk about. And even though your analysis could be really robust of all 3, you also need to be decisive about what is necessary to share and what isn't. 12-point font, Times New Roman, double-spaced, and then your citation formatting style is really up to you. You can write it in APA, you can write it in MLA, you could write it in Turabian if you really want to. But I'm not necessarily looking for sources outside of the 3 artifacts unless you're using a source to define whatever your value is. One thing I do want to direct your attention to are the deadlines. So next Monday, one of the things that you'll have to turn in is an outline, or like a working sort of outline of your paper. This is more so for me just to get a sense of, like, again, your writing process and what helps for you, and how you kind of like build your assignment. So that's due on Monday. And then notice that there are 2 rough draft days, with conferencing in the middle. So the first rough draft that's due on Canvas, that's going to be at the end of the month. And you'll have to submit a copy on Canvas, and by 12 p.m. on that Friday. I will take the time to read through it, through your rough drafts over the weekend, to leave comments on them, and then coming in on the following week, there will be conferencing days. So we won't meet on that Monday, but because there will be conferencing available to all of my students. But notice the conferencing dates: there's a Saturday, a Monday, and a Tuesday. And so Saturday and Tuesday are online conferences, and you can make those appointments already. It's already linked into our Canvas schedule and to our syllabus. Monday, I meet with students in person. It's about a 15 to 20-minute meeting just for us to sit down. You're going to get comments from me regardless, on your drafts, but this is just an opportunity for me to sit down with you and kind of talk with you through it, explain kind of what I'm seeing, and where I think like you might need to make some adjustments, or where I think it's really strong. So you'll do that rough draft, we'll conference, and then you'll bring a revised draft to class on the 5th, which is that Wednesday. And then in that class, we'll do peer review, in your pod groups. And then you'll have until the end of the week to revise and submit your final draft, right? So this draft of your paper will get many eyes on it, and we'll get a lot of opportunity to kind of like feedback, and get feedback, and to sort of workshop it. And this is kind of the typical schedule of what our essays will look like. There will always kind of be like a week where it'll be filled with rough drafting and conferencing and all of those things. So just want you to keep that in mind. Now, when it comes down to what is the next step here, the next step of your assignment is to really start identifying artifacts, and then asking sort of the rhetorical questions that we've talked about in class. So last week, excuse me, last week, these were the questions that I brought up, right? Like when you're doing analysis, you sort of ask these questions of, what is the speaker trying to accomplish? Who is this message for? How has this issue been addressed by others? Meaning, like, what is some sort of comparable work that is happening, right? Why does the speaker think this is necessary? All of these things. These are all great analysis questions, right? To kind of get you started. And again, like sort of in the vein of that rhetorical situation. I do have additional questions, and these are the things that you'll actually have to accomplish in your free write that's due tonight, is to look at a piece or artifact, and then really answer these questions here, which again are similar to the last ones, but they're just more, I guess, more specific, is the best way to put it, right? So who is the speaker? What is their core message? Who's the audience they're trying to speak to? What is the relationship they're trying to forge with that audience? And then what rhetorical choices are made to accomplish this? Meaning, like, what are the choices made in that communication, whether it's like visual choices or textual choices, or um, kinesthetic choices, or whatever it is, right? Like body choices, if you're looking at something that's more visual. What are the choices that are made to accomplish uh, the forging of that relationship, right? In what context or genre is that communication done? Is it a video? Is it an audio track? Is it a devotional? Is it a speech? Is it a like, so breaking down genre, and then asking sort of those questions of, what are the expectations of that genre? What is the structure of that has to be met in order for it to be made, right? If you think about, I don't know if you know Gordon Ramsay, and when he's on MasterChef and somebody comes to him and says, like, this is my take on a burger, but it doesn't have any of the things of a burger, like there's no bun, there's no meat, there's no vegetables, there's no sauce, then he'll get really upset, because, like, why would you tell me this is a burger when it's not a burger? Like, it tastes good, whatever it is, but it's not a burger, right? So the expectation of what is meant to be there, that's a really big factor in rhetorical analysis. And so you want to kind of think about that. Like, what are the expectations? What are the limitations that genre imposes? And then what are the benefits or the enhancements provided? Meaning, like, why was this the choice, right? And then how effective is the communication as a whole in achieving whatever that perceived goal is. Um, if the goal of the message is to get people to act, or if the goal of the message is to entertain, or if the goal of the message is to bring awareness, like how effective was this piece of communication in that particular genre for that particular audience? And ultimately, how do you know that, right? So all of these questions are meant to really get you to think about um, the rhetorical situation. These are some of the things that you might have to bring up in your paper to really argue for where a value is being embedded or encoded. And so I show you these questions because moving forward over the next couple of weeks, these are the things that you'll have to answer through like looking at some of our rhetorical examples that are linked into your next couple of free writes. The first one being the one that's due tonight. The one that's due tonight, you have a choice between a speech by DBC and a devotional by Tim Keller, and you have to choose one and basically answer these questions. I want you to think about really what differentiates these two from one another, because they're both online speeches that were recorded, and they're both from men of God, but like there are choices that were made for specific purposes, and they uphold a particular value, whether of like the discipline or of that particular organization or of that person. If you can kind of identify those things, it'll help in the long run for really what we're practicing in this paper. So looking ahead, free write number 4 is due tonight by 5 p.m. So I've changed that date for you. So you want to kind of think through and utilize sort of what I've talked about today to apply to that free write. Free write 5 is due before class on Monday. So there are a bunch of other rhetorical examples of varying types that I'd like you to look at, and I think you're supposed to pick like one or two to answer the same questions on. So make sure you look through all of them. We are going to talk about all of them in class on Monday. And then in that next class, we'll talk about those rhetorical examples. We'll talk about the outline, sort of what my expectation is for the outline. Even though like it's pretty open form, I do want to, like I said, I want to see your process. And so ultimately, just plug on ahead. What I would encourage you to do is to go look at the artifact that you would have brought to class on Wednesday, and start with that artifact and ask all of these questions, right? Like ask all these questions here and kind of break that down. You can go back and refer to some of these questions if you want to add a little bit of depth, but make a decision on if you want to keep that source or if you want to find something else. And again, like find things that are really interesting for you to analyze. If it's interesting to you, then the paper will be interesting to me, So that would be my biggest suggestion. But between now and Monday, I just want you to make a decision about the 3 sources you're going to use for this project. I want you to do the analysis of the rhetorical examples that were given, and just be ready to kind of dive into and discuss some of these things in class. But okay, if you have any questions, please let me know. My email is open. I will be free to answer any questions for you. But otherwise, I wish you the best. I will see you on Monday for sure, and I'll be praying for you all this weekend. Okay.